Which model does the panel think works best as a scientific explanation for a global flood?
All right, if I jump in on that, John, and then hand over to you and the others.
Go ahead.
All right. So, number one, there is not a singular model that is perfect when it comes to understanding and working out the global flood. So, if you think about some of the major models that have been proposed over the years, you've got Walt Brown's model, right? Hydroplate idea. A very interesting idea, wrought with difficulties in the real world, right? Then you've got things like catastrophic plate tectonics. Well, this is based on the idea that you have plate tectonics that move, which is probably one of the better models. But even then, that only explains one particular aspect of the flood in terms of the rising and the falling of the land masses. It doesn't address things like how do we get a geological column out of that, if the geological column even exists. Right? And so you have to be careful about trying to take secular ideas and secular concepts and just putting it into the context of saying, oh, well, Noah's flood did this, right? Because it doesn't always line up and it doesn't always work. If you start from the scriptures, right, where you get certainly a concept of a global flood and then work backwards, you can actually start to make a bit of sense. You also need to make sure that you understand where many of these modern ideas in geology came from, because the reality is, if you're looking for a purely scientific explanation for a global flood, you're never going to get one. The global flood was a judgment, a spiritual judgment on the world. It was initiated spiritually in the sense that it was God who brought the flood on the world. The Bible is explicitly clear about that. And so if we're looking for a purely scientific explanation, we're never actually going to find one, because it keeps going back to God. Now, there's nothing wrong with looking for evidence of how God implemented that, right? Did he use meteors to trigger the flood? Interesting idea. Did he cause the ground to break up underneath with magma? Interesting idea, right? And these are all great things that we can look into, but first and foremost, be wary of looking for a purely scientific explanation of a spiritual judgment. Secondly, this is where we can open up to some of the panels and stuff. If you look at any one model, I think the best one going in the world of creation science at the moment probably is the catastrophic plate tectonics model, right? But it still doesn't address the things like, how do you produce a geological column if it even exists? And we've been very vocal at creation research, right? And you can quote even secular scientists like Professor Derek Ager, who says effectively the geological column doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. And in fact, we went to a beach was that only yesterday? It was only yesterday, wasn't it? It was just yesterday. We went to a beach, right? And in every standard geological map you pull up, you're supposed to have the weld at the bottom, then you're supposed to have the sandstone on top of the weld, and then you're supposed to have the chalk on top of the sandstone. But it wasn't like that, was it?
No, it was the exact opposite.
You actually had it the other way around, right? You were walking along the beach and the rock layers were there sideways. They actually got old sideways from the weld to the sandstone to the chalk. And so when you actually get out there in the real world, you realize that there is no such thing as a singular geological flood model. But we do need to make sure we're paying attention to the real world and making sure we're interpreting it from the background of the Bible and not the other way around. John, any comments?
Sure. We live in a world in which you and I are programmed from kindergarten onwards to believe science has the explanation. So therefore, instead of studying counseling, they would study scientific counseling. Instead of looking for psychology, it would be psychology as a science, right? Theology as a science. Now, there's almost a contradiction there, but it's the one that Joe brought up, and you and I have to be very much aware. And no apologies, John Mackay, the creation guy, is notorious, famous, or whatever word you want to use or abuse me there, for making very, very much of the fact that Charles Lyell, who was Charles Darwin's tutor, who was a consequence of choosing to run with the French rebellion before his time, of course, but the attitude from there was anti-God. He's, on record, my aim is to get rid of Moses out of science. Now, you go to the museum like Craig did in Melbourne, And you certainly don't find any reference to Noah's flood or creation or anything like that. Even the Aboriginal belief in creation is modified, mollified, etc. Aborigines have no concept of 20,000 years or anything like that. This is white man's add-on rubbish because white man does not want to acknowledge God or Moses. Now, you must come to grips with the fact that you will have to make a choice here, because if you choose a scientific explanation, it is inherently atheistic. It is inherently anti-biblical. It's especially inherently anti-Mosaic. Those are the three things. I mean, if you do secular counseling, there's that word, leave God out. If you do counseling at university, there's no such thing as a Christian counseling course at a secular university. The secular universities are set up to leave out God. Oxford and Cambridge weren't. But when Lyell and the others come along, God is belittled and belittled till he's right out of the picture almost, despite the fact they have chapel and all of those. You can't miss that. Right? So therefore, I'd encourage you to realise the question as asked is a non-question, because it really should be, will I choose to believe in a biblical record and start from there, as Joe said, or will I choose to believe a scientific or look for a scientific one? And you creationists out there, stop trying to be pseudo-scientists and use that as your proof of the Bible. You actually start off with a philosophy, with a presupposition. The Bible is the word of God. Let's go from there and see if we can find anything consistent with that. So that's where I'd start. Craig, have you got any comments on that?